Hello everyone, this is Jeff from the Ozark Mountains. That's in Missouri, in the USA. Today we're taking a look at this Commodore 128 and 1571 disk drive. I bought these last summer and I've not even powered them on yet, and I've really wanted to get them fired up and see how they work or if they don't work. And I got these at a local auction, which was a treat because you almost never find these vintage computers here in central Missouri, and I was very surprised when I got to take a look at them. Let's get a closer look. Here are just a few of the circuit boards I've had made recently by PCB, who is nice enough to sponsor this video. So whether you need a few boards or a lot of boards, check out PCB. So head on over to PCB and get your instant quote on standard circuit boards, flex circuit boards, assembly, and they now also offer rapid prototyping, so you can get your mechanical parts made as well. That's an awesome service. So for your next project, head on over to PCB. Our Commodore 128 is in really good shape. The case hasn't yellowed too bad, but the keys sure have, so we may have to try a little retrobrite on that. Now if we flip it over, we can see what the odd bit is. Let me zoom in here on that label. And everything looks pretty normal, blah blah blah, serial number, till we get down here to made in West Germany. Now, if you're in Europe, this isn't going to be unusual, but to find one made in West Germany in the United States is odd. And I thought maybe this traveled back here with somebody, and it was a PAL machine. I did pop it apart though, and it is actually an NTSC machine. It has the right crystal and the right VIC-2E chip. So this is an NTSC machine made in West Germany. And that got me really curious, so I pulled the disk drive out of the box. This did not come boxed, but the disk drive did. Let's take a look at that drive. We can see even our disk drive is in good shape. It's not very yellowed. It has the drive transit card in place, which is a treat. And if we flip him over and look at the label, we can see it is also made in West Germany. And the label here says it's 120 or 220 volt, 50 hertz, and it's got this little bit of a label stuck over the original label. And after thinking about this for a while, I have an idea why these might have been NTSC or American market machines, but made in West Germany. I suspect that our Commodore 128 and 1571 disk drive may have hitched a ride home with a soldier returning to Fort Leonard Wood. Now, Fort Wood is about 35 miles, which is, I don't know, roughly 56 kilometers, just down the road from here. It occupies about 100 square miles, which is around 250 square kilometers. Fort Wood was built in 1940 as a training facility. Present day, there's about 13,500 personnel living on base, and more personnel and base employees that live in the surrounding communities. I suspect maybe that this Commodore 128 was purchased on base in Germany by a soldier and then brought back to Missouri to Fort Wood when he returned to the States. This might explain why we have an NTSC machine made in West Germany. I obtained an Amstrad PPC 640 this way, but actually got to meet the soldier that brought that back with him. Now, I have not tried this thing out yet. I've got an aftermarket power supply that I know that's good, so I'm going to go ahead and just power it up and we'll see what happens. Well, we heard a pop from the SID, but we have no video, but the 4080 button was down. So let's try it again. And again, the pop from the SID, but no video. Okay, the TV is set to the right thing. Oh, there we go. Okay, loose video cable. So we do have a signal and it's green and it's kind of, well, typically green and crappy for Commodore 128. That was very anticlimactic. So at least we're mostly working now. Let's go ahead and pop the cover off this. We'll hook up the test harness and we'll give it a good run just to make sure everything's okay. Go get all our cables unplugged here. Grab a screwy driver. Keyboard connector. And our ground strap for the keyboard. Well, that seems like an awfully big screw for that location. And oh yeah, now I remember. One of these big caps here got a little crushed somehow. I remember that now from when I had the cover off of it last year to check the VIC chip. So at least we'll have that to repair. And it's fairly clean on the inside as well. This does not have the big solder blob on this tab in this corner, like most of the other ones I have seen do. I wonder if that's something they did at the US factory, but not in West Germany. These little twisty things are so much nicer than having to deal with the solder. There we go. Got our twisty doos out of there. Yeah, the board looks quite nice, except for this dent in the capacitor. Let me get you a picture of that. You can see we've got a big dent in this capacitor, and that is never a good thing, so we're going to have to replace that. I think this one's fine. There's no point in recapping the few electrolytics that are on here. These are never really an issue. So unless it's bad or presenting problems, just leave it alone. I think what we'll do now is we'll go ahead and put the test harness on here, and we'll see if that pinpoints anything as being problematic. Okay, I've got the test harness hooked up to the machine. Now this is the same as the C64 harness. This is Sven Petersen's design, but it has a different keyboard dongle. This is something I helped him by testing out when he was designing it. It's got a side for the flat C128 and a separate side for the C128D because the connectors are different. And the dead test cartridge is a little different for the C128. And you can also get a version that will plug into the U36 option ROM socket, so you can run it from there. Look on World of Yanni for that. This, I took an extra Epix fast load cart and reconfigured it to work as a C128 cart. You've got a few configuration differences. But let's go ahead and fire this up and we'll run the dead test for the C128 and see what it says. Oh, yes. Actually, that shouldn't happen with the... Oh, I forgot. There is a button on this keyboard dongle. You need to press that down when you're turning it on or resetting it. That way it'll jump into the cartridge. Otherwise, the dongle happens to short the same lines that send it into machine language monitor mode. So Sven added this little switch right here. With the C128 test, it tests both banks of RAM and that type of thing. Well, that's really good. Everything works, including the SID. That's fantastic. I think what we'll do is we'll put in the C64 diagnostic test cart, and we'll let that run for a little while to make sure that seems like it's okay too. Then we'll turn our attention to replacing this capacitor. Yeah. Part of my fancy modification was to put some Cap-Tan tape over some of the connections. I've got a Versa cart that I'm going to reconfigure for C128 test cart. I haven't got around to that yet. And now I've got a regular Commodore 64 dual diag cart. Bought this from iCore 64, a place in Canada, several years ago, and 3D printed a case. The case is on my GitHub. This was modified from one of Sven Petersen's designs. I've got it in the diagnostic mode. And there we go. Give this a whirl. So since this is a C64 cartridge configuration, it's booting up in C64 mode. But you can see that it is showing bad on U1, which is one of the CIAs, but it only failed on the very first test in this test loop. So I'm guessing that's just a bad connection on the user port. You'll see when it comes back around and it gets to that test again, that it will actually pass. It's passed every time except that first time. So when we swap out that capacitor, we'll go ahead and clean the edge connectors, and we'll give it another test cycle just to make sure everything's okay. I looked through my capacitor stash, and I did not have one exactly like this, so I'm going to borrow it from another C128 board. I've been borrowing parts from this and then slowly putting them back. It's got some more problems though, so I'll borrow this capacitor and we'll swap it into here, and then we'll check this one and see if it was bad or not. We've got our PCB out of the back RF shield. I'll go ahead and flip it over. We want our innermost one right here. This guy. I'm going to put a little paste flux on there. Hit that with some fresh solder. Leave it on there a few seconds to heat up those thick traces. Remember, soldering is not a race. Give the leads a little bit of a wiggle. Okay. And he's out. And I already pulled the one out of the other machine, and we can tell them apart because one is dented and one is not dented. And it doesn't look like it was leaking. That's always good. Got out our little component tester here. Here we go. Now we got Mr. Denty hooked up there. Give it a click and see what it says. It says 322 microfarads, ESR 1.3 ohms. Wow. It's actually testing as a good cap. That's really surprising. Even with that big dent in it. So we'll go ahead and test the new one, or the borrowed one. That says 319 microfarads. But we notice the ESR on this is 0.07, where the other is 1.3 ohms, so that dent did have some sort of an effect. So we'll go ahead and put this non-denty one in there and inspect the back of the board. Straighten up our leads here. And it says our positive is that away, which lines up with our other cap. That's always nice. And I'm holding it from the other side of the board. I'll just do that one there, just to kind of stick it in place. Again, I'm going to leave that on there a couple seconds, because that's a big thick tray, so I want it to heat up on both sides. Got my iron set to about 650 Fahrenheit, which is 342-ish on that silly metric scale. You metric people and all your simple conversions and powers of 10. Okay, let's have a closer look at this board. Okay, here's the back of our board. I'm sure you've noticed these bodges on here, and there's even a cap here, and you're wondering about that. Well, no fears. That is on all of these boards. Here's something else if you've never noticed it before. It says Rip, Herd, Fish, GUAY, and PAR. So you can get a good look at that. And if you're ever looking for your board version on a C128, gosh, there's terrible glare. It's right here under the cartridge port, and you got to take the bottom shield off in order to see it. Okay, so we've got a good cap on here. All our bodge wires are held down good on the back. We need to clean up our soldering, clean the contacts here, and then I think we're done. Then we'll go ahead and hook our test harness back up and make sure that cleaning our contacts took care of that initial failure. When you want to clean a board like this up, we've got our connections here we soldered. So we've got a little flux around there. If you just take your alcohol and a toothbrush and do this, you're just smearing it all around. After you've done that and got it broke up, take a rag like this, put it over the same spot, and rub it again. That way you'll pick it up. This deal with putting the rag on the back of the board and wiping over it again, I learned that from Noel's Retro Lab. So if you don't watch his channel, you should check that out. This isn't strictly necessary, but as long as I'm here, I'll get all this old flux off of things. And if there's some particularly crusty bits, you can just very carefully convince them to leave with a screwdriver. And while I've got the alcohol and a rag out, I want to get this heatsink compound off of everything. And there's some under this shield here too. You can see right there. So we'll go ahead and clean this all off of here with some alcohol and a rag and apply some new compound. So here is our VIC2E. It's the VIC2 chip for C128. It's a part number 8564, and this one is a Rev5CA. Of course, this is the VDC chip for the 80 column mode. Our friend Sid. This one is a 6581R4. This little guy right here is the Z80 CPU. This is the 8502, which is our microprocessor. It's like the 6510 on the C64. This is the 8721. I forget the name of this guy right now. This is the PLA, and this is the memory management unit. These PLAs are really stable though. I have seen one memory management unit fail, but that's a pretty uncommon failure. And we've got our ROMs over here. And our two CIAs are here and here. We've got some heatsink compound down there. And don't forget to clean it off inside of this guy. It's not a bad idea just to give these a slight tweak like that. Make sure they're putting enough pressure on our chips here. Okay, to clean up our edge connectors like this, I've got a nice clean pencil eraser. And I'm just going to go gently down each one like this. Doesn't take much, I'm not pushing real hard. Just a couple swipes. And when your eraser gets dirty, just rub that a few times on your jeans. It'll clean it up. And then some alcohol on a Q-tip and clean up all your eraser shavings. So now we have some nice clean contacts and we haven't really disturbed that cold plating. I'll go ahead and get the rest of those and then we'll get this thing tested again. Did a bit of experimenting to figure out how to stick these hot glue tacks back down. I've got my hot air here set to about 170°C and I've got the airflow turned down. Just trying to get this warm enough to reflow the glue. That seems to work really well. And the only downside is that it tends to heat up the board too, so you've got to hold it in place with something like a spudger or a screwdriver for 30 seconds to 60 seconds till it sets up. I think I saw Gadget UK doing this, and I thought it was a good idea because you don't have to scrape off the old hot glue and apply new hot glue. Just remelt what's already on there. Okay, so you remember when we first started this diagnostic harness thing, I had my funky little rigged up cartridge here for the C128 diagnostic test. We ran that and it was fine. And then for some inexplicable reason, I put the C64 diagnostic cartridge in there. Well, that doesn't work, as we found out. You get false bad readings from the CIAs because there is a slight difference with the serial dongle here. And so the tests are different. And so after swapping around CIA chips and not seeing a difference, and I thought, well, maybe something's wrong with the harness, and I tried it on a C64 and that was fine. I got out another C128 and had the same problem. And then it dawned on me, oh yes, there's a difference in how the C128 serial works. It's something to do with allowing the burst mode for working with the 1571 to work. So yeah, just use the C128 diagnostics on the C128. I think what I was thinking is that you can use the C64 dead test, and that'll test out the lower 64K, and that can help sometimes, but you want to use the C128 diagnostic test. Something else I recalled while taking apart the second C128 is there's supposed to be a screw that goes from the metal cover down into here, and it was missing on this one. And that and this capacitor being kinked right here makes me think that somebody was in there, and also the screw that was in this corner of the board that has the grounding strap for the keyboard, that was way too big a screw. So I'm not sure what somebody was doing in here. It doesn't look like anything's really been repaired, but at any rate, I've had this running, as you can see now, for 15 counts, so quite a while, and it's running fine. So now I think our board's okay, and we can move on to cleaning up the case and the keyboard. One other little tidbit to talk about when you're refitting your shield here is to make sure that the tabs are making good contacts with the chips. And if you put these guys down in position, you want the tab, the flat part of the tab here, let me get zoomed in on that. You want the flat part of the tab to come out flat on the chip. Now if there's not quite enough pressure, you can bend these down a little bit, but if you do it at this location, the end of the tab here will wind up like this, and only the point will touch the chip. So if you have to bend it here, you also need to bend it back up here so that foot on the end of the tab will rest flat, or pretty much flat, on the chip. I don't like putting the heatsink compound on these until I install everything back in the case. It's a lot easier to keep everything lined up, and then I'm sure that I want to do it then. I won't need to take it back apart and get it all over my fingers again. Well, I think we've reached a pretty good place to stop for this episode. We've got our board here all cleaned up, and we got the one minor problem fixed, and got kind of led myself down the primrose path there by putting that C64 diagnostic cartridge in there. I'm still not sure what I was thinking, but we recovered and got back on track. Now, looking at the case a little more, yeah, it is a little yellowed when you compare the outside to the inside, and I need to retrowrite these keys anyhow. So in the next episode, we'll take the keyboard apart, clean it, we'll retrowrite everything, and we'll take a look at that 1571 disk drive. I'd like to say thanks to everyone for watching, and thanks to all those folks who help support the Hey Birt channel through Patreon and other means. Your support is greatly appreciated, and if you'd like to find out some more information about that, well, if you look down in the description below, there are some links there. If you have any questions or comments, I sure would like to hear from you. If you leave them in the comments section down below, that would be great. Well, until next time, bye.